It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host here this morning. Appreciate you riding with us. If you're catching us live on our streaming service on our website, you're catching either audio or video. If you're on patriotfb.com, we're grateful to have you. Appreciate you coming along with us for the morning. For the record, by the way, our brand new listen line is in effect, which means you need to start calling that. If you're in a remote location and you want to be able to listen to America's Voice Now, you can't get us on a terrestrial radio station, or if you don't have access to the internet, you can simply dial a telephone number and listen to the entire show, live from 8 to 10. After that, you can simply dial in anytime you want and listen to a pre-recorded version that just runs endlessly. What an outstanding service provided to us by Audio Now. That listen line phone number is and if you got your pen and paper handy, I'll give it out a couple times, and then you'll start hearing me give it out on a routine basis. Telephone number is 415-325-0725. That's 415-325-0725. Now, the cost for you? Nothing. All you got to do is dial in. If you're on a mobile phone, and let me rephrase that. If you're on your personal tracking device, you can dial in with your unlimited minutes. And so if you're on a home phone and you've got unlimited long distance, you can dial in from your home phone, and which is also a household tracking device. And you can listen to the entire show live. You can also listen to it pre-recorded later on. So I am very, very appreciative to Audio Now and the folks over there who have provided this service for us. I've been asked by a lot of folks, where can I get a listen line where I can just simply dial in and not use up data minutes or data services and simply just use the airtime itself, which I have unlimited access to. And so here you go, folks. This is the solution for you. We've got a listen line. You can simply dial in. Appreciate you coming with us this morning. Let me touch on what our topics are going to be for the day's show. Number one, Chicago gun sales, or the sale of guns in the city of Chicago has been ruled unconstitutional by a federal judge. So what? I'm going to explain that in just a moment. But the reason I say that is because what you don't know is that these gun sales, or this gun sale ban, which was ruled unconstitutional, I got to tell you, I have a problem with that. Because, first of all, the judge stayed his own ruling, pending an appeal from the government. And we're going to talk a little bit about gun rights in this first segment this morning. So just ride with me, because I want you to understand why I say, so what? It's important. Our second topic, 40 million guns were sold in just the last 24 months. Now, that number is actually far greater than that, but the reason I use 40 million is I want to be conservative. Here's why. 40 million background checks were run between 2012 and 2013. In fact, 21 million of them were run in 2013 alone. So 21 million Americans can't all be wrong. What's important to understand is that multiple purchases can be made on a single NICS check. So the odds are, statistically speaking, that far more than 40 million guns were sold in the last 24 months. And if you take the total since 1998, there have been 180 million of them run. We're going to talk more about it. Our third topic, the truth about antidepressants. Now, I'm telling you right now, statistically speaking, there's a number of people that are listening to this broadcast right now or are watching this, and I'm telling you, there is a significant percentage of those people who are watching this right now who are on antidepressants. I've got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that is the danger zone. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you what you can do to help get yourself off of them. I am not an advocate of antidepressants because they alter your brain chemistry and they rewire your mind. We're going to talk a little bit more about it and what you can do to get off of them and replace it with something that is actually far better and far more effectual and will not damage you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Our fourth topic is going to be the FBI is no longer in law enforcement. In fact, they have outed themselves from the law enforcement game, according to their own statement. However, they've done something else. They've taken up the mantle of state-sponsored terrorism to be perpetrated on American citizens. We're going to talk a little bit more about it and the reasons why. They now are no longer in law enforcement. They're in national security. Oh, gee whiz. Now I get it. Once you're in national security, a whole different set of rules apply. Yeah. Those are the rules that'll enable you to basically get away with anything. And I do mean anything. Unlimited budgets. No questions asked. You can deny all those Freedom of Information Act requests. You can spy on Americans with impunity because they're doing the dirty work domestically that the NSA is prohibited constitutionally from accomplishing. All right, so let's get into our first topic. Chicago gun sales were ruled by a federal judge to be unconstitutional. Now, in my comment on our Facebook page, I threw out a couple of issues here, and I just want to go over them with you. I don't want you to get too excited yet because, initially when we hear something like that, we kind of raise our hand in the air and go, yeehaw, one for the good guys, right? Well, apparently, there are a couple of judges out there who still recognize that the Constitution has merit. And this one ruled that a Chicago city ordinance that prohibits legal gun dealers from selling guns within the city limits of Chicago is unconstitutional. However, stop right there. Don't get yourself all in an uproar. He tempered his brief foray into liberty by staying his own order, pending a decision on whether the city wants to actually appeal the ruling. Now, let me make this perfectly clear for everybody. And I think it bears merit and warrants saying again. The Second Amendment, and for the record, I'm just going to give it to you one more time because, well, it's important. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to take a moment and whatever you're doing, put your critical thinking hat on for a moment. And I'm going to give you a couple of synonyms that are appropriate and work for or as a replacement for the word infringed. And I want to be clear for everybody listening. The rights of individuals to possess weapons for self-defense and the defense of our nation from tyranny were never intended to be infringed by anyone for any reason. And the reason I say that is because the word infringed, which, in modern parlance and modern English, we redefined a lot of words from what our founders used. And I understand that. Government redefines words all the time. But infringed in this case is synonymous with the following words: breached, contravened, disobeyed, encroached, imposed, intruded upon, meddled with, offended, trespassed, borrowed, broken, crashed, entrenched, infracted, invaded, lifted, obtruded, pirated, and presumed upon. So for the record, what I'd like you to do is utilize this really brief critical thinking. This is like a quick pop quiz, right? I want you to substitute any of those words that were listed above as synonyms for the word infringed and see if you finally get it. So, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be breached, shall not be contravened, shall not be disobeyed, shall not be encroached upon, shall not be imposed upon, shall not be intruded upon, shall not be meddled with, shall not be offended, shall not be trespassed upon, shall not be borrowed, shall not be broken. Think about that for a moment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be broken, nor crashed, shall not be entrenched, shall not be infracted, shall not be invaded upon, shall not be lifted, shall not be obtruded, shall not be pirated or hijacked, and shall not be presumed upon. What I mean to say, in case you haven't gotten it yet, is that under no circumstances may anyone in any position, whether that be government of a national origin, a state, or a local origin, no government has the right to bar you from the possession, the ownership, the use of weapons for self-defense, either of your home and your family or your place of business, or your automobile, or your butt when you're walking down the street. Nor do they have the right to bar you from having those so that they may do their will upon you with impunity and immunity. You see, I posted this up on the Facebook page last night. There was a guy out there whose name is Stefan Molyneux. And he had a phrase that I thought was very appropriate, so I posted it up because I wanted you guys to see it. In case you don't have access or you're in the car or something, let me just read it to you. If you are for gun control, then you are not against guns, because the guns will be needed to disarm people. So it's not that you are anti-gun, because you'll need the police guns to take away other people's guns. So actually, you're very pro-gun. You just believe that only the government, which is, of course, so reliable, honest, moral, and virtuous, should be allowed to have guns. There is no such thing as gun control. There is only centralizing gun ownership in the hands of a small political elite and their minions. Now, I happen to like Stefan Molyneux. I've watched a number of his videos on YouTube, and he's got a website out there called Free Domain Radio. He's got 1,500 YouTube videos up there. He's a sharp guy. He's an atheist, so those of you who are dead set against the seeing a viewpoint, which tells me that you're not thinking critically, by the way, will not want to watch his stuff. If you're a critical thinker, you're going to look beyond that and hear what he has to say and recognize logic, reason, and intelligence when you see it. I then found a quote from Aaron Zellman, who was the original, one of the original gun rights fighters. And here's what Aaron had to say. And I think this should bring clarity to anyone's question about, well, what about the gun thing? I mean, should everybody have guns? I mean, should anybody be prevented or prohibited from owning guns? I mean, what are the rules about that? Well, here's what Aaron had to say. Never forget, even for an instant, that the one and only reason anybody has for taking your gun away is to make you weaker than he is, so he can do something to you that you wouldn't allow him to do if you were equipped to prevent it. This goes for burglars, muggers, and rapists, and even more so for policemen, bureaucrats, and politicians. You see, the truth is, if anyone applies even the remotest, the most tenuous threads of logic and reason to the arguments on gun control and the issues surrounding guns, they have to recognize that there is absolutely no way that the purpose of gun control and removing guns from the hands of Americans is intended to prevent violence in the nation. Because the argument would be, well, if we just take guns away from people, or if we limit the amount of guns out there, well, stop right there. You're never going to limit the amount of guns out there, and I'll tell you why. And I'm going to talk about this in this next segment. But we do know, for an empirical fact, that 40 million plus firearms, just the background checks were run. So what that tells you is, and that's only in the last 24 months, folks, 180 million since 1998. Now, of course, the number of NICS checks that have been run in the past, couple of years under the Obama regime is staggering. I mean, 19 million last year alone in 2013. 19 million. What that tells us is that the country recognizes, and I'm sorry, I apologize, it wasn't 19 million last year. It was 21 million last year and 19.5 million in 2012. So 40 million in the last 2 years. You see, the truth is that we have a right to not only own firearms for our own protection, but the real primary purpose, and this idea that the primary purpose of the founders was that so we would be able to defend ourselves against a government operating in a position of tyranny. And I don't think anyone who is intellectually honest with themselves or willing to at least look at the evidence that's pervasive around us can deny that what we are living in today is a situation where our government has completely abandoned any precept that they're going to follow the Constitution. That's what honestly makes me afraid of running with the ball on an Article 5 constitutional convention or convention of the state solution. Not that I don't believe that constitutional amendments are a good thing. We do, and our founders gave us a way to, modify it for a reason. But they don't follow the one we have. So the only thing that we'd be able to do would be to create a new amendment that says, in the event that anyone is found not following the one we have, that they're subject to a charge of treason. And I don't see that one getting through anytime soon. So if you get a constitutional convention together and you make some modifications to limit federal power, which is the idea of Convention of States, which you can go to their website, by the way, excellent site, conventionofstates.com. The problem is that even if we go ahead and make some constitutional changes, we can't make any that are going to be dire enough to really give us control back of our country. And therein lies the problem, you see? Not to mention the fact that it would take us years to accomplish that. And frankly, we don't have them, which is why the Second Amendment exists in the first place. It was placed in second place very wisely and astutely by our founders. Let's understand what they did. The First Amendment says that you have the right to life, that you have the right to freedom of religion and free speech and the right to redress your grievances with your government. Now, the reason that that's first is quite simple. When you don't have free speech, no one around you would recognize the tyranny that's being accomplished. So you have to have free speech in order for the people to be aware that there's a problem. The Second Amendment is only there as a backstop if the First Amendment proves that the tyranny exists. And you have not been able to resolve it through the, redress of your grievances with your government. So, they could have put the Second Amendment first, but why would they? Because if you don't have the First Amendment that enables you to have free speech and the ability to redress your grievances with your government, you can leave religion out of it for a moment. If you didn't have the ability to speak freely and say, does anybody else see what's going on here? If you didn't have the ability to have free speech and put an article in the paper that says, our president is acting like a dictator, or our Congress is run amok and is completely out of control, or the judicial system is so corrupt at this point that they are rubber stamping the tyranny exposed by or espoused by the administration in either the executive or the legislative, then how would you know to exercise your Second Amendment right? How would you know to use the principles of mutually assured destruction if all else fails? You wouldn't. Because if you can't have free speech, you don't even know there's a problem. The principle behind what our founders did was to say, first and foremost, you have to have the right to be able to speak freely about what the problems are. You have to be able to approach your government and say, you're doing wrong. We need this to stop. And in the event that they consistently and continuously refuse to solve the problem, then, of course, you have an opportunity and quite frankly, an obligation to resolve the problem the other way. Because, as Jefferson said, single acts of tyranny can be ascribed to an accidental opinion of the day. But a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers plainly proves a deliberate, systematical plan of reducing us to slavery. And we have to be able to speak freely about that. We have to be able to point to it and say, hey, anybody else see that? The king's not wearing any clothes. Then, and only then, does the Second Amendment become applicable. Because if government fails to allow us to redress our grievances, then we do have a manner and a method available to us. Now, that brings us to a whole separate topic. Who amongst us should be allowed to own guns? Well, we've got a minute left, and so I'm not going to be able to get into all of that right now, but I will extend it into the next segment because we're going to be talking about how 40 million guns were sold in the last 24 months alone first. And we're going to incorporate this discussion into it because I think it's critically important that you recognize that the idea that's been hammered into your mind that there is a certain class of people that should not be able to own guns has been so vastly expanded that it is actually endangering our republic. I'm talking about our military veterans who come back with PTSD. I'm talking about the felons in the country, myself included. I'm talking about the people who are political undesirables. So we're going to evaluate that, and we're going to take a look at why and how many of you have made the mistake of saying, well, criminals shouldn't have guns. I'm going to stop you right there. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on our multiple other pages, including Facebook and YouTube and Patriot FB and our new listen line. Please make sure you write that down. We're going to return in just a moment, and when we do, we're going to continue this discussion on guns and who and where and how and why and when. We'll be right back. All right. Now, you see, you can take that as either all right or all ride. R-I-D-E. Why do I say that? Well, because those of you who have listened to me for a long time know that I call this show that I do and the effort that I put out to accomplish all of this stuff, including all the work that you don't know about that it takes behind the scenes to make this happen and all the money and all the rest of that. I call this my Paul Revere moment. Why? Well, because I construe it to be my duty to awaken and alert the American people to the tragedy of what's happening to our country, to the tyranny, to the treason, and to the rapidly approaching death of our republic. So I'm riding through the ether, if you will. I'm riding through the internet. I'm riding through your phone line. I'm riding through your radio. And I'm raising the alert. The terror is coming. The terror is coming. The tyranny is here. The tyranny is here. Awaken. Awaken and defend yourself, America. In 2013, 21,093,273 people did just that. They went out and filled out a background check to purchase a firearm. In the last 24 months, there's been over 40 million. Why is that important? Well, first and foremost, let's make it clear right up front. I do not agree with the principle of a background check. Yes, I recognize that would leave our society open to dangerous people to obtain a firearm. But you see, the real reason that that's not important is because more guns create less crime. Now, there are many who will argue that, and we can go on and have an entire conversation that would last from now until sometime around midnight to resolve that. I don't think we will, because you and I, if you feel that way, are never going to see eye to eye. But the truth is, when you look back at the last decade and some change, the last 15 years, there have been 180,320,069 background checks run. 180 million. Now, the last time I heard the gun rights argument coming out of the mouth of the liar, usurper, counterfeiter, Manchurian candidate-in-chief, he told us that 90% of the nation was in favor of gun control. But yet, if you take the number of 180 million checks and construe that as even just a single gun per check, which we all know doesn't happen, the total number of guns that were sold is roughly, let's just call it 180 million, okay? Let's not assume for argument's sake that more than one was done at a time. There are 219 million adults in the United States over the age of 18 right now. There were less in 98. Assuming for argument's sake that you wanted to say that, each one of those was an individual sale to a unique individual, 82% of the population would have a gun. Now, I recognize that that's probably not the case. The estimates are that about 50% of America owns a firearm. And no one really knows because, prior to 1968, there were no gun laws about you could walk into a hardware store and buy one. And I use that analogy or that fact as evidence of the fact that guns don't create crime. In fact, they prohibit it. Prior to 1968, we didn't see mass shootings. Of course, we didn't have 50% of the population doped up on antidepressants and dangerous psychotic drugs either. Prior to 1968, you could walk into any store, you could order your guns through the mail order. I mean, you got a catalog from Sears and you simply ordered the gun and it came in the mail. When I was a kid, and I was born and raised in New Jersey, but in the 60s, you could go, and of course I live very close to Manhattan, so we would go in as a family quite frequently. You could see kids in Manhattan who would literally get on a subway and ride a subway to school with a gun pointed at the ceiling, a .22 rifle, with the buttstock on the ground and the muzzle pointed at the ceiling between their legs. They were on their way to school, and they would bring their rifle to school with them. When they arrived at school, they'd go down into the basement of the school, and they'd put it in a locker there, where they would go down at the appropriate time when their shooting class came, and they would do their target shooting. Then they would gather the gun together at the end of the day, and they'd take it out of the locker, and they'd go back up onto the street, and they'd get into the subway car, and they'd go home. Now, we didn't have incidents of multiple shootings. We didn't have incidents where people went off like homicidal terrorists and walked into movie theaters and murdered people. I mean, you had murders, but, you got murders in Sri Lanka. You see, prior to 1968, felons weren't barred from owning a firearm. And the truth of the matter is that very few people, let's quantify this. The crime rate that we had in the 60s, before 1968 now, and in the 50s, was far lower than the crime we experience today. Certainly violent crime. Now, violent crime climbed dramatically in the late 60s and early 70s, through into the 80s, where violent crime got so tied up with drugs and the war on drugs, which frankly just perpetuated the whole concept of violence, that it became dangerous to a fault. Today, we see violent crime falling. And one of the reasons we do see violent crime falling is the resurgence in firearms ownership. Now, I'm here to tell you, in 1968, under the Gun Control Act of 68, they banned people with felonies from owning a firearm and people with mental health issues. Let's tackle the mental health issue after a moment, but for right now, let's tackle the felony issue, because they are two separate things. The hypothetical scenario, which isn't quite so hypothetical, it affects literally tens of millions of Americans, is that, here you are, a young guy or a young girl, and in, late 70s or early 80s, you made a mistake and you got caught with, a bag of marijuana or a small amount of cocaine or maybe even some heroin. Or you made a mistake and you got wrapped up with the wrong crowd and you boosted a car. Or maybe you got into a fight with some guys and it got a little out of hand and you got an assault beef or an assault charge. Maybe you had some kind of a problem with alcohol and you had an accident where someone was injured or even killed. But for the vast majority of people that are currently on the felony prohibition list, it's almost silly that those people are banned today from owning a firearm for a mistake which happened 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years ago. If they have an exemplary history and an exemplary record after their brush with crime, then why are they still prohibited? Why would a guy who got caught with an ounce of weed back in 1977, who since then has never had any kind of law enforcement issue, in fact, maybe has gotten no interaction with law enforcement other than the occasional parking or maybe a speeding ticket. They have a good job. They've married, raised children. They pay their taxes. They're a contributing member of society in the sense that they act and function in a format that most people would look at and say, that there would be an exemplary citizen. They go to church, they've got neighbors that appreciate them, they help out other folks. And they had this one black mark on their record back from when they were young and foolish. But it has prohibited them from ever owning a firearm. And to make matters worse, it's also prohibited everyone within their family from owning a firearm. Because a felon can't be in a premise or a house where others' firearms exist, because that would be called the magical, ephemeral, constructive possession. Just being in a household, if you're a felon with someone who owns a firearm, the feds will say, it's your firearm or you have access to it, and therefore you are in constructive possession. Even though you may never have touched it, even though you may not even know it exists. So the prohibition is not just on the felon, the prohibition is on everyone in that circle, that familial circle, or anyone who lives in the same premise. You don't even have to be in the same family. See, the real problem here is this. Even felons have a right to defend themselves, their communities, their families, and their nation. Now, I recognize that there are some individuals that we as a society may look upon and say, that guy or that girl is clearly a danger to other individuals. You know, someone who has a long history and a series of incidents where they have misused a weapon or injured others and show no remorse and no caring to live within the boundaries of a society that says you can do what you want as long as you don't hurt others. But I don't think the guy who got caught with a half ounce of weed falls under that category. Do you? I don't think the guy who got into a scrap and punched another guy, in a fight falls under that category. Once. 25 years ago. You see, the problem that we have is that society is embedded in your mind that once a criminal, always a criminal, and that in a criminal who's guilty of something as small as having a dime bag of weed back in the 70s is a threat to society in general. I disagree. The idea that anyone can be prohibited from owning anything, and by the way, we can go all the way back to the 1925 National Firearms Act, 1934, excuse me. The National Firearms Act, which prohibits Americans from owning fully automatic weapons, short-barreled shotguns, anything that they can, layer up underneath that. That's all a farce. Our founders had the very, very clear and explicit concept, and they voiced it repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again, that the real premise behind firearms ownership was to preserve your nation from lawlessness and tyranny. And you can't do that if you're walking around with a black powder blunderbuss and the military or the new militarized law enforcement is running around with fully automatic weapons. Jefferson said so. Washington said so. I mean, guys, the list is endless. You don't have to even look hard. You can find it very, very easily. The truth is, the real premise behind gun control is that they want to control the access of Americans to firearms because you cannot take a country and completely bury it underneath the layers of tyranny and treason and slavery and despotism when people are well armed. I mean, the case is clear. And I'm going to give you one that's so recent you can't avoid agreeing or recognizing it. I mean, back in the 1980s, the Afghanis were fighting against Russia. And we armed the Afghanis to the teeth in an effort to let them be a proxy for us to fight an age-old enemy called the Soviet Union. Now, whether or not you agree with what was really going on behind the scenes, I don't even care. But the initial premise was that that was what it was about. Those same weapons are still in use today, except they're being used on our people. And the hypocrisy of an argument that says you can be prohibited from owning a gun while simultaneously we're arming the rebels in a foreign country. In fact, there's a guy on Patriot FB who posted up a link that I thought was very good. It was just a little graphic. It shows Obama standing there, and there's a quote underneath him. And the quote says, "We're sending assault weapons to rebels in Syria to confront a regime that does not represent them." Then right next to it, there's another picture that says, "There is no reason why any American should own assault weapons." Now, I want you to just think about that a minute. Because if you think about that, on one hand, he's saying there's no reason why any American should own an assault weapon. But in the previous statement, he says, we're sending assault weapons to rebels in Syria to confront a regime that does not represent them. I ask you, does this regime in the United States of America right now represent you? Well, does it? George Washington said a free people ought not only to be armed and disciplined, but they should have sufficient arms and ammunition to maintain a status of independence from any who might attempt to abuse them, which would include their own government. Now, if you were to have sufficient arms and ammunition, that would make it clear that the premise of limiting what you may own and who may own them is inappropriate. There's a dichotomy there. There's a diametric opposition principle. The free people ought not only to be armed and disciplined, but they should also have sufficient arms and ammunition to maintain a status of independence from any who might attempt to abuse them, which would include their own government. Now that leads to the point where, and I've used this phrase before, and I've gotten some flack for it, and I don't really care. You see, George Washington was, at that present moment, applying the principle that we applied back in the 60s between the United States and Russia and America. The principle of mutually assured destruction. By having a deterrent so great that no one dared oppose it. No one dared be the first to throw the missile. Now, of course, George Washington and the founders didn't have access to nuclear weapons nor any knowledge thereof, and so they had to utilize their best principled concept of the idea of mutually assured destruction. The idea was to have sufficient arms and ammunition to maintain a status of independence via deterrent from any who might attempt to abuse them, which would include their own government. And so therefore, I rely upon his idea because there is no limitation to what an American may own. If you can afford an Abrams tank, have at it. If you can buy an F-16, I'm okay with that. First of all, the odds that anybody would buy an F-16 and then become, what was he going to do? Fly over a bank and drop drop a little parachute that says turn over all your money to Bob outside or I'm going to bomb the bank? I mean, come on. The idea that an American cannot own a machine gun is ludicrous. Now, personally, I believe that automatic weapons are a waste of ammunition. Most people cannot control them. Even in the military, they finally got rid of fully automatic, and they revised that down to a 3-shot burst. Because, one, it wastes a lot of ammunition, and two, if you've ever fired a machine gun, they climb, and they're relatively inaccurate, and they can cause collateral damage that you did not intend. And so, I'm not suggesting that the idea of a fully automatic weapon is something everyone should have. Quite frankly, most people aren't well enough trained to utilize them. And I frankly fear the guy who knows his rifle well enough to use one shot rather than a guy who's got to spray and pray. But it's not the idea of the machine gun that's the problem. It's the idea that government says that they can limit you to what you can have. It's the idea that they can say you can't have more than X number of rounds. Why not? See, the rallying cry of the tyrant is the word crisis. It was James Madison. And our government claims crisis, crisis, crisis. Crisis from school shootings, crisis of violence. Truth of the matter is, that's all smoke and mirrors. There are no crises. There is only the crises that our government is subjugating us and enslaving us systematically. Second Amendment is inviolate. And no one should make the mistake of thinking otherwise. It is intended to be the one practical application that we have to protect our nation and ourselves from a government out of control. Okay. When we come back, we're going to talk about the truth about antidepressants. In fact, the reason I'm tying these two together is because antidepressants and gun control are often tied together. So let's address that. Before we go there, I'd like you to make sure that you contact the law offices of Jason Henry if you have any kind of a criminal matter, including federal gun charges, by the way. His office can be reached at area code 417-256-4100. He specializes in felon in possession charges. He's on the square in West Plains, 417-256-4100. While you're on the square and you're visiting him, you can go over and see our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, or you can call them at 417-257-1776. 417-257-1776. They've got cigars and tobacco and any kind of accessory that you would want, pipes, the whole 9 yards. You can also visit our friends over at Wits End Classic Barbershop right on the square as well and get yourself a shave and a haircut while you're there. Phone number there is 417-372-2053. That's 417-372-2053. No appointments necessary, but you might want to just call. They're closed on Mondays. I know that for a fact because I go there all the time on Monday to get my hair cut because I forget. And they're not open. I go there and get my hair cut. $10, guys. You can't beat that. And he does the old style hot towel shave with a straight razor. Man. Treat yourself. You'll be very glad you did. Make sure that you see our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. They've got a lunch special every day that is an open salad bar and pizza bar. And on Tuesday nights, they have family night, which means kids eat free. Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains. Make sure that you visit them. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle this topic of the truth about antidepressants and how they affect you.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. I am so glad that you decided to ride with us this morning. We're riding on a journey where we go out there and awaken America to the fact that tyranny is coming. In fact, tyranny is here. It's not coming. It's not in the future. It's actually here already. And so I want you to be aware of that because, well, it matters. You need to be aware so that you can take appropriate action. And also, in addition to that, let's be honest. You have to be preparing yourself and your family for what we know to be coming. What is coming, you say? What are you talking about? Well, look, if you're at this point so blind to the fact that our economy is virtually in the early or the mid stages, I should say, of collapse, that we have overinflated our stock market, that the Federal Reserve is currently in possession of some $4.5 trillion worth of debt, which they've bought back from the country after producing and manufacturing it from nothing. If you're not cognizant of a government that feels that it's okay to surveil you at will and strip you of your Fourth Amendment right against unnecessary government involvement in your life, if you don't feel that the IRS is building an enemies list and becoming the new arm of enforcement, I'm not quite sure what more you're waiting for. Now, I will say this. I know that there's a whole bunch of people out there that are perhaps aware of it in the back of their minds, and they're very scared. They don't want to admit it because to admit it, it's a human failing, right? If you admit it, that means that you then, as reasoning, logical beings, we recognize that by that admission, that states that we must now do something to make a correction. And most people just don't want to do that because, well, they're uncomfortable with the idea of having to fight back. They've been raised with the principle that non-confrontation is the only method. And I disagree. I think confrontation is not only wise and advisable in some cases, but it's absolutely necessary when we're talking about a situation like this. I mean, let me put it to you this way. Someone broke into your home and said to you, with a baseball bat in their hand, you're going to put these handcuffs on. Would you do it? I wouldn't. The truth is, I would rather be involved in the fight and have at least a chance of escaping or taking the bat or blocking the swing or fighting back, because I know that once those cuffs are on, I have no control over the situation anymore. I am now at that individual's mercy. And the fact that he's standing in front of me with a bat clearly proves there will be no mercy. But many Americans would rather put on the handcuff and hope for the best. These are the same folks that allow themselves to be duped into thinking that a pill can solve it all. These are the guys that, and girls, that say that I feel, lousy about my life because I'm struggling financially, or my marriage is a mess, or my kids, are out of control. I'm poor. I don't have an education. So I'm just going to go to the doctor and I'm going to tell him what I got, and he's going to give me a pill to make it all better. The truth is that antidepressant medication is a tool of the current tyrannical approaches that our government is exercising on us every day. Now, it's not some grand conspiracy. The companies that make them are swimming in money from the sales. The government, on the other hand, recognizes that people who are taking them are most likely to be apathetic, uninvolved, disconnected from reality. And they don't worry too much about the occasional person who goes off half-cocked and shoots a bunch of collateral damage. Because it's only that. It's only collateral damage to them. You see, they want you apathetic as an electorate. They want you feeling a general pervasive malaise, because that makes you doubt your liberty, doubt your freedom, doubt your right to self-determination, doubt your right to self-governance. I mean, if I'm so depressed I can't get myself out of bed in the morning, what makes me think I can govern myself? We've been fooled into thinking that a pill can fix anything. It's come with a lot of brainwashing, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. And the CDC and the FDA and many, many, many others advocate that positioning. But I got to tell you, the horn of plenty of pharmacopoeia that's basically showered on Americans, when I think about how many people are on antidepressants and psychotic or psychotropic, I should say, medication, you know what's the image that jumps to mind? When you're sitting there in the parade and the fire department truck goes by and they're throwing, candy out to the kids on the side of the street. They grab a handful and just throw it out there, and they grab a handful and throw it out that side of it. And the kids are scrambling out there and picking it up, and stuffing it in their pockets, and they're all gleeful. Because that's where we are. Medication, good. Depression, bad. I did a show not so long ago, and I'd have to go off these statistics off of memory because I don't remember them exactly, but there was one that was in stark clarity, and that was that 40% of women in the country, and I believe it was over the age of 35, but I could be mistaken. It may have been 40. But the number was 40% of the women in the country over the age of 35 or 40, and it doesn't really make much difference, are on an antidepressant. And that fully 20% of our children are on an antidepressant. And the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you are on an antidepressant, it doesn't just mask your mood and, put you into this kind of a, nothing really matters and I don't care and I'm just kind of here marking time. But it rewires your mind. And if you've ever talked to anyone who's come off of antidepressants after a long string of being on them, they will tell you that it takes months before they begin to think in a clear and rational, logical manner again, before that fog dissipates and lifts. I'm not sure, and I don't think anybody's ever done a long-term study, that those effects in the rewiring can ever be undone. But I can tell you this. Until we had antidepressants, until we had these brain-altering chemicals, I mean, we had the occasional, outlandish behavior by one individual. But we never had, massive insanity like we have with these mass school shootings. Never. We had an occasional one here and there. But the one that shocked everyone's conscience was the shooting in, by Dylan Klebold and the other guy over in Colorado. And that should have been a warning sign to us because both of those kids were on antidepressant drugs. And I did a show before that reiterated the number of these mass shootings, and not always mass shootings, but murder rampages, whether they be 1 or 20 people, that were tied to antidepressants. In fact, I could probably look up the link I posted up there about the statistical history of them. I gave it to you folks at that time. The truth is that there are solutions to get off of antidepressant drugs. And I got to tell you, I'm going to encourage anyone who is currently on them or is influential to someone else who is. There are 2 articles out here I want you to find. And they're easy to find because I gave you the links to them. If you're watching us on America's Voice Now, they're right below you in the day's news stories. If you're on Facebook, the links are there. If you're on Patriot FB, I put it in those links this morning, and they'll be in this YouTube in the section that describes the show. There's 2 of them. One of them is from Bloomberg, and the other is from Reuters. And they're referencing this new study that's come out that says that meditation for self-insight and self-introspection may trim anxiety and depression. Now, that's not something new. Let's be honest. Meditation has been around for, thousands and thousands of years, right? And I'm not talking about, some kind of, transcendental religious experience and all that nonsense. Or Zen Buddhism. And if that's what you practice, that's fine with me. Whatever it takes for you to feel like you've got control of your life and that you have insight into who you are and what you are and where your strengths and weaknesses lie and what you can do to improve yourself. Those are all good things. But I can tell you this, you're not going to find it in a pill from GlaxoSmithKline or Pfizer. I can tell you you're not going to find it in Zoloft or Prozac or Paxil. All you're going to find in there is desperation. There were 47 studies, according to these articles, that showed a 5 to 10% reduction in anxiety symptoms and a 10 to 20% improvement in depression in individuals who meditated compared with those people that took a placebo. It suggests that meditation improved pain, although it wasn't clear which types of pain benefited the most. The findings supported the use of mindfulness meditation as a way to moderate the need for medication to treat anxiety and depression. Practicing mindfulness meditation is a form practiced for 30 to 40 minutes a day that teaches a person how to become more aware of one's thoughts, their breathing, and their emotion. There's the problem. There's the problem. I just read you the problem. And we only had to wait until the 3rd paragraph to find it. You know what that problem is? I want you to hear it again. And then I want you to tell yourself quickly what that problem is. Mindfulness meditation is a form practice for 30 to 40 minutes a day that teaches a person how to become more aware of one's thoughts, breathing, and emotion. That's the rub. Nobody wants to become aware of their thoughts and emotions. And those who are desperate not to see their own thoughts and to inquire and be insightful about their emotion and their thinking process will say, I don't have 30 to 40 minutes a day. Guaranteed. That's the perfect excuse right there. I don't have 30 to 40 minutes a day. What do I look like? I'm too busy for that. Got to take the kids to school. Got to cook dinner. Got to go to work. Got to unplug the toilet. Well, let me put it to you this way. Masking your symptoms and masking your emotions and your thoughts with the drug that basically just puts a black tarp over it. And I want you to think of it that way. I mean, you've got this massive emotion and thought processes, including your ideas and your beliefs. And you can think of it like all of that is sitting down there like a den of teeming snakes, right? They're all intertangled and running around and moving around and wiggles and just throwing a black tarp over that so that you can pretend it's not there doesn't really help the problem. Doesn't help you sort them out, doesn't help you get the poisonous ones out versus the non-poisonous ones. You're just pretending they're not there, good or bad. And what I'm trying to tell you is that if you experience depression, anxiety and insomnia, heart disease, chronic pain and stress, that's what this study was attempting to try to identify. Could meditation be a solution for that? And I got to tell you, if you're only one of there's those who will say, well, wait a minute, it only showed 5 to 10% reduction. Hey, listen, let me tell you something. The vast majority of Americans with a 5 to 10% reduction would be just fine. If you think that life should be, unicorn farts and rainbows, who told you that? Where'd you get that impression? Oh, that's right, because you watched that stupid box. That one that is the Lord and Master of your home. That one, yeah. That's the box that tells you how to think, what to eat, how to feel, when to laugh, when to cry. And you wonder why you're not in touch with your own thoughts and emotions. Hello. I mean, really. So here's what I would suggest. If you are on an antidepressant, or your children are on an antidepressant, I would strongly encourage you to read these articles and then seek some sources that will give you the tools and the skill set necessary for you to begin a process of utilizing meditation as an alternative to the pills. Because those pills do a couple of things. One, they make you feel like it doesn't really matter. Two, they make you an illogical person, an unreasoning person, a weak person. I'm not saying there's some people who truly don't have psychiatric problems. But I'm saying that the vast majority of people who are on antidepressants are just there because they're lazy and they're bored with life. And so rather than face their emotions and their thoughts and their stresses, they just take a pill to say, well, they're still there, but they don't really bother me anymore. If there were ever a crunch in this country, when I say a crunch, I mean a collapse of power, light, fiscal, economic, government, whatever. Pick it. I don't care whether it's a natural disaster or an earthquake or a typhoon or a 10 bazillion banana peels fall out of the sky. I got to tell you something. The people who go off antidepressants half-cocked or, cold turkey, they on a high level and they drop them, Do you realize that most of the people who've been involved in these school shootings and mass shootings were people who'd attempted to do that? So I don't recommend that you do this without the knowledge of your doctor or, counsel. But I do recommend that you begin to take proactive action in your own life. I do recommend that you look at this as you wean yourself off of the poison. I do recommend that you take the black tarp off the pit and you begin to identify which are the poison snakes in the hole and which are the non-poisonous. That you systematically begin to eradicate and eliminate the poison snakes. Because if you're not willing to do that, then I got to tell you, you're failing yourself and you're failing your family. You're failing your nation. Because you're no good to us as patriots who are looking here to, try to regain and restore our nation, because you're not capable. And frankly, you're manipulable. You're malleable. You're easily manipulated. You'll be the first one to say, yeah, the guy down the street's got all the guns hiding in his attic. Bob over there, he's got a ton of food in his basement. I'm not saying that meditation will solve all your problems. What I am saying is that if you have an opportunity to take a look at your issues, it's one way to accomplish that. And it may be the beginning of a great journey for you. To get yourself clear of that, to begin to look at the world in a new way, to see the bright colors again, to smell the scents that give you, give you that sense of gratefulness. Gratefulness that you're able to recognize them, that you're able to see it, to sense it, to taste it, to smell it, to feel it. Don't let the fear control you. Because that's really what this is all about. Don't let the fear control you. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the FBI is no longer in law enforcement. Instead, they've now become a part of the government-sponsored domestic terrorism agencies. That should matter to you. We're going to talk about it. They've dropped themselves from the law enforcement roles and now are a national security group. Let's analyze what comes along with the term national security. Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, it means there's no more rules. All right. Boy, I wish I could live my life without any rules. I wish I could just be impulsive and abuse my power and authority. Really? That's what the FBI says. The Federal Bureau of Investigation used to be a group that classified themselves as the elitist of the elites in law enforcement. Now, those of you who've listened to me long enough know I don't even like that term because I prefer the term peace officers. And I'm not suggesting that there's no need to have an FBI. There are. I mean, there are bad people in the world. I'm not going to inhale any unicorn flatulence and pretend otherwise. But the FBI has changed their role, and they've adopted a brand new principle. It's called national security. And they declare that they're no longer in law enforcement. It's funny, they have a fact sheet that goes out, and the old fact sheet has 3 bullet points on it, and the new fact sheet has 3 bullet points on it. But the first bullet point has changed. You can find the links to this on our sites, and it'll be in the bottom section of this video. Bullet point 1. The primary function of the FBI is law enforcement. Bullet point 2. The FBI does not keep a file on every citizen of the United States. Bullet point number 3. The FBI was not established until 1908, and we have very few records prior to. It's interesting to read those 3 factoids. The first one, let's address them one at a time. First one is the primary function of the FBI is law enforcement. It's kind of like a mission statement thing, right? The after fact sheet, by the way, the only thing that's changed is the primary function of the FBI is national security. Now, there's some changes that they made that correlate with that, and we'll go over those in a minute. But I want to go over these bullet points first because I think it's indicative of what they think of themselves more so than what you think of them. The primary function of the FBI is law enforcement. The FBI does not keep a file on every citizen of the United States. I just asked who the FBI was. I didn't expect you to become so defensive. Thou doth protesteth too much, I fear. See, because most people in the United States, well, they may have heard of the tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that, oh, come on, they keep it's on everybody. They didn't really believe it until Ed Snowden came out and said, oh, wait, it's true. Here's the proof. I mean, there were some people that truly believed that the FBI kept the file on every citizen in the United States, and I was among them because I had all kinds of knowledge about the use of their carnivore system and echelon system, prior abuses of their power and authority, including the fact that all the way from J. Edgar Hoover on down, they did keep files on every citizen in the United States, at least those that they felt that they could either manipulate, coerce, co-opt, and or wanted to keep an eye on. So maybe they didn't keep a file on every citizen of the United States. But that's really not the important thing here. You don't need to keep a file on every citizen in the United States to be a danger to liberty and freedom. You only have to keep a file on those citizens that pose a danger to your position because they are willing to expose oppression. I mean, why would you get so defensive in the second bullet point of your mission statement? I've heard lots of mission statements. I've written mission statements for corporations. And never have I seen the second bullet point be a defensive statement. Never have I seen the third bullet point be a defensive statement. Because that bullet point says the FBI was not established until 1908, and we have very few records prior. Okay. What exactly were you guys worried about us finding out? I guess I'm stumped. So when you got 3 bullets in your fact sheet, And 2 out of the 3 clearly state your own paranoia. I don't know, somehow or other there's just something wrong with that. Now, let's go back to the first one, which is almost a negative, although most people wouldn't immediately recognize it as such. The primary function of the FBI is law enforcement. Now it says the primary function of the FBI is national security, which is, again, a defensive statement. You're not saying the FBI is tasked with keeping law and order in the United States. The agency quietly has changed their slogan, if you will. And prior to 9/11 and, the buildup of the oligarchy conspiratorial willingness to drive us to tyranny and oppression and despotism, the FBI's primary role was going after, criminals that were big enough or vast enough or broad enough or far enough reaching and ranging that states couldn't really do the job properly. I.e., a guy who's on a multi-state crime spree, right? He's, shooting it up in Texas, and then he runs over to Oklahoma and robs a couple of banks there, or kidnaps a baby in one state and bolts off and hides it in another state. I mean, I understand the premise behind that. The one state is limited to how far they can traverse into the next state without getting permission and all that hoopla. So, there's some value to having an international or a interstate body that can, solve crime like that. Sometimes, one state may not have the records necessary because the FBI did a lot of white-collar crime before. But it's interesting that since 9/11, they've almost dropped that. In fact, a spokesman for the agency came out and said, when our mission changed after 9/11, our fact sheet changed to reflect that. Well, that's not exactly true. They only just recently changed it. This guy emphasized that the long-standing agency's national security focus has always been present. We rank our top 10 priorities, and counterterrorism is first. Counter-intel is second, and cyber is third. So it's certainly accurate to say our primary function is national security. Well, that's not exactly true. But I can tell you why they did it. The reason they did it is because when you change your mission from law enforcement to national security, the world becomes your oyster. Suddenly, funding is unlimited. Suddenly, you can pull the shades down over all the windows. You can put bars across all the doors. You can insert locks on every door. The truth of the matter is that the benefit to the FBI is by calling themselves a national security agency, it comes with all the benefits and bennies of secrecy and unlimited budgets. And that's the real reason. Between 2001 and 2009, they doubled the amount of agents that have been dedicated to counterterrorism. And that's, by the way, an Inspector General's report. This isn't just, somebody making these numbers up. Meanwhile, the number of people that were working on white-collar crime and a lot of the other types of criminal cases that they used to do, and that was their primary focus, was going after white-collar crime, huge frauds, white-collar, money and banking issues and things like that, right? Because that stuff covers multi-state borders, sometimes international borders. But there's been a significant and dramatic decline in the types of cases that they're doing with that. the number of people that were tasked to deal with violent crime, property crime, and white-collar crime has fallen dramatically. Now, it doesn't mean that those crimes aren't happening. It just means that there's a heck of a lot less guys out there to try to figure out who's did it. Back in 2007, the Justice Department did not replace 2,400 agents that they had retasked from all those other types of crime to counterterrorism. Back in 2000, just before 9/11, the FBI sent prosecutors 10,000 cases. By 2005, that had fallen to 3,500 cases. Wow. That's a pretty interesting drop, don't you think? I mean, to go from 10,000 cases to 3,500 cases in a 5-year window tells me that you have completely redirected the ship. According to one FBI investigator, he says, had the FBI continued investigating financial crimes at the same rate as it had before 9/11, some 2,000 more white-collar criminals would be behind bars. Now, it's interesting because the FBI has been tasked with white-collar crime, right? Which would generally indicate that a lot of what happened that caused the crash of 2008 might have been caught were it only for the FBI doing their job. I'm talking about the abuse of the banking system. You remember Bernie Madoff? Well, he's supposed to be overseen by the SEC, you say. Well, okay, but I mean, the truth is there's a lot of fraud in real estate, including Harry Reid. The simple truth is that they failed to crack down on a lot of the financial crime that led us to the 2008 collapse and the real estate fraud that occurred ahead of the 2008 subprime mortgage crises. After 9/11, the FBI was tasked with a whole bunch of new duties they didn't have before. So, to a certain extent, I'm saying, I get the fact that they may not necessarily have been in control of their own destiny. But the real benefit to them, and no one turns this down because human beings are naturally desirous of power, is that once they declare themselves to be a national security agency, all of the costume that they have to wear falls away, and they can actually begin to operate as a clandestine, overfunded, secretive agency. They don't have to be responsive to Freedom of Information Acts anymore. They don't have to be responsive to investigations into their behavior or tactics or any of the criminal activity that they may in fact foster in order to accomplish their stated goal of resolving some issue. Once you're under national security, and there's a guy, McClellan, who summed it up very well, and he was interviewed for this article. He says, if you tie yourself to national security, you get funding, and you get exemptions on disclosure cases. You get all the wonderful arguments about how if you don't get your way, buildings will blow up and the country will be less safe. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the crux of this whole thing. The country will be less safe. That is an excuse which we have been hearing for the past 12 or 13 years. And it has been the ruin of our republic. The total number of people who have been killed with terrorist action. In fact, let's just take this a step back. I was going to say since 2011, but let's take it all the way back to the beginning of the century. The total number of people that have been killed in a terrorist action. Now we're talking about, not some kid on antidepressants who goes off and shoots a bunch of people in a school. We're talking about international terrorism, the kind that they're spending trillions of dollars on and subjugating all of your rights to achieve. The total number of Americans that have been killed in terroristic attacks is dwarfed by the number of people that were literally killed just in automobile accidents last year alone. The truth of the matter is that your risk of being killed in a terrorist attack is infinitesimal. It's minuscule. It's tiny. And I'm not saying that we don't need people out there to make sure that, somebody doesn't smuggle in a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb that could, create and wreak havoc. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have somebody watching out for the people that are trying to figure out a way to compromise our electric grid, or some rogue nation that might want to, throw an EMP off and set it off, 150 miles above the surface of the planet and essentially knock us into the Stone Age for the next decade or two. There is a risk of that. But I am saying that this wholesale, that the wholesale oppression of all Americans is not only unnecessary, but it leads you to the conclusion that that's really not their primary motivator. In other words, to save us from the external threat. I think the problem is that they now consider us to be the threat. And utilizing the mantle of national security takes away all the rules. Now, the FBI, for those of you that don't remember a show I did a couple of weeks ago, has been exposed for doing the exact same thing as the NSA. Now, the NSA says, we're not spying on every American. We're only looking at international people. And yes, we're doing the metadata thing, but we can't identify who you are. It's not personal. It's all anonymous. And we're just looking for patterns. But that's not entirely true. See, what they don't say is more important than what they actually do say. What I brought out to you in a show a couple of weeks ago is that the FBI is utilizing and running the same exact software, the same exact programs, the same exact things that the NSA is running. But they're doing it domestically because they have a purview here domestically in the United States that the NSA does not have. So that which the NSA cannot do, the FBI does. And I told you that there's a fat pipe that goes directly from the FBI centers directly to the NSA. Directly. Now, if that's too conspiratorial for you, okay. So let's just go back in history a little bit and remember this thing called Echelon, which everybody, when you first mentioned Echelon after Carnivore, was like, you got to be kidding me. You are a real conspiracy theorist. You got a tinfoil hat on that is about 8 inches thick. Well, Echelon turned out to be real. And really what it was a systematic abuse of all citizens by a number of countries, including the United States and Canada and England and Australia and New Zealand. And so what happened was this. There were constitutional prohibitions in place in the United States of America and constitutional prohibitions in place in all those other countries that says you can't spy on our own people. And so essentially the United States would say, I can't do this, but there's somebody we want to look at. So, hey, New Zealand, would you do me a favor and take a look at this guy? And then when you get the data, just shoot it over to me. If you think they haven't just taken that and modified the principle of that to reapply it to the FBI and the GCHQ over in England, you're an idiot. Those programs never went away. The policies never went away. Ever. None of that's changed. And so the FBI is doing exactly what the NSA is doing, but they're doing it with impunity because, well, they have a domestic agenda that the NSA does not have. And it's all about keeping you safe. And you should be afraid of those boogeymen. Okay. So the FBI is no longer in law enforcement, but they are in the state-sponsored, government-sponsored domestic terror business. The only problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, is that you are the target. And if you don't think I'm right, that's okay. You do yourself a favor and just sit on that for a little while and wait until it hatches. But Echelon hatched and Carnivore hatched, and now Mr. Snowden has exposed the fact that some of those people who were wearing tinfoil hats back in the mid-2000s were basically right. In fact, the only reason they were wrong is because they didn't accurately understand the depth and the scope of the depravity of the actual programs going on. They were only wrong because the real truth is what was going on was far greater than even their worst fears. But I rest my case. Okay. Let me do and wrap this show up with a couple of our friends. Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop in West Plains. You can find them at 417-257-1776. You can find their Facebook page, and it's linked on our Facebook page, in fact. Patriot Cigars and Tobacco in West Plains. They offer all kinds of tobacco products. Make sure that you see them, and while you're there, make sure that you get a chance to see the Wits End Classic Barbershop, which is the place where I go to get my hair cut. $10, you get a great haircut and some good company, some good other patriots you can chat with and have some fun with. Make sure that you see, they're all on the square in West Plains. And incorporated in that is Jason Henry. He's a law firm on the square in West Plains. He's a friend of mine, but he's also a very, very good criminal attorney. And he's on the square in West Plains, and his telephone number is 417-256-4100. Now, he does cases that are related to criminal issues like drugs and firearms and stuff like that, and domestic or state issues. But he also handles federal cases, which is very unusual because, you know, there's a limited number of attorneys that practice federally, and, of course, they're always ready to, you know, rake you over the coals when it comes to the pricing. I would encourage you, if you've got a federal case, that you talk to Jason about it. You can reach him at 417-256-4100, and make sure that you give him a call. Our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, they are open 6 days a week, and I believe that they're open until late at night, like 10 or 11 o'clock. On Tuesdays, they have family night, which means that you can bring the kids in, and kids under 12 eat free. And they have a buffet there that's open for lunch and dinner on Tuesday nights. But the buffet is open at lunch, and you can get salad, and there's an open salad bar there. And then you can also get pizza, and they have some pasta there, and, you know, bread snacks and all kinds of stuff like that. Great place to go. The price is right. You can't beat that. You can eat healthy, and you can have something tasty at the same point in time. And so I would encourage you to visit the Pizza Hut in West Plains on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. There's a lot of Pizza Huts around the country, but this one's special. This one's special because how many Pizza Huts do you know that support America's Voice now? You all have a great day. God bless.